when we were putting together the programming for Getting Real, we thought long and hard about what new research we should be spotlighting, because Getting Real has now become a place where the newest developments in our field are presented to people who need the information the most. And for me, one of the things that was really standing out about what's being accomplished over the last year is a new attention to much needed audience demographic information and audience behavior information. And we are so lucky to have with us today Keri Putnam and Barbara Twist, who have been working so incredibly hard on some of the most kind of extensive research that I've ever encountered on these topics. And here to facilitate and guide us through this really packed 45-minute conversation is going to be our moderator for this morning, Asad Mohammed, who is the, oh my gosh, I'm gonna need to get your title wrong again, so I'm very, very sorry. It's in our program guides. Vice President of Engagement and Strategy, I believe, at American Documentary, okay, sort of. At American Documentary POV, one of the most respected strands broadcasting creative documentaries that we have in public media. He has for 20 years been a person who's been working in community development, engagement, partnerships, all things that I think are vitally important whenever we think about audience. His work at American Documentary centers around making sure that the engagement that audiences have with their films extends beyond the broadcast window and into spaces that might not be used to engaging and exhibiting films. So we are in the best of hands with Asad. Thank you so much. I'm going to invite you up now. So let's give him.
Good morning. All right. Now we're in business. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this Fireside chat at this year's Getting Real. My name is Asad Mohammed. I'm the Vice President of Impact and Engagement Strategy at American Documentary POV. American Documentary is a media arts nonprofit that powers POV Shorts, and America Reframed, along with World. My pronouns are he, him. I am a brown-skinned black man wearing a blue patterned shirt, blue vest, a baseball cap with blue, brown, and cream colors made out of mudcloth, and yeah. So at POV, I lead a community engagement and education-focused department that builds resources around films that we then push into communities to serve audience care, to provide more context around the topics discussed in films. And audience is incredibly important to us. So much of our work is focused on inspiring people to take some sort of action after watching a film. And this is my first Getting Real, and I really just am feeling grateful for the insights and wisdom that filmmakers have been providing for these last few days, to those who are willing to listen and those who are not. But I think we're going to see some more changes and evolutions coming out of this gathering, so I'm looking forward to that. Also want to just state that personally, I stand with Film Workers for Palestine to end the genocide in Palestine. Yes. And just want to say that Getting Real is welcoming free speech, and everyone should feel free to express your opinion. We will not stop you. And for more resources and to sign up for the newsletter, please go to filmworkersforpalestine.org. I believe there's a visual happening at 12 right outside later today. Okay, so this morning I'll be your fireside chat moderator. We'll be talking to Keri Putnam and Barbara Twist. I'm going to read their bios. We're going to start with you, Barbara. Barbara is Executive Director of the Film Festival Alliance. She's a film consultant, as well as, if this will let me be great, consultant and producer with a background in film festivals, art houses, post-production, and distribution. As a producer, her award-winning films have played at festivals, including Austin Film Festival, Aspen Shorts Fest, Palm Springs Short Fest, and New Orleans Film Festival, and have been nominated for the Student Academy Awards. She's a former director of partnerships for Vidiot's Foundation and the former managing director of the Art House Convergence. Barbara, can you please join me up here? Give a round of applause. Thank you. And next up, I'll be bringing Keri Putnam, fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School, Shorenstein Center. Keri is a producer, board member, and strategic advisor to media companies and nonprofit orgs. She's a 23-24 fellow at the Shorenstein Center, researching the challenges and opportunities facing independent docs and scripted film in the US. In 2022, Keri founded Putnam Pictures to produce film and television. She was also CEO of Sundance Institute from 2010 to 2021, where she and her team proudly supported independent artists in making and presenting their work. So many great things, and I'm gonna stop here. Keri, please join us. Please give her a hand. So I wanna get into it, and first I wanted to start this conversation by defining a word that we hear all the time, and audience, you know, but I think just wanted to just confirm with you both that when we say audience, we are speaking in the most expansive of ways, not just people who watch films in cinemas and other venues, but also at home, people who are streaming, all of that, right? Okay. So first, I wanted to hear you all speak to how this collaboration came about. Can you all say a little something about this collaboration and why is this important to our field?
Absolutely, thank you. It's great to be here, everybody. Thanks for coming. One of the biggest joys of my year so far has been meeting, or not year, the last year is meeting Barbara Twist. She's amazing, and we got to know each other because I'm doing this research project, which I'm going to tell you about shortly, at the Shorenstein Center, and Barbara, in her capacity as the head of the Film Festival Alliance, but also I knew her from a little bit from her art house convergence work. I wanted to look at the audience, and I thought, who better to partner with, collaborate with, engage with than this group, among others. So that's how it came about, and I don't know, from your perspective.
Yeah, I think I was thrilled when you reached out because at FFA we are always trying to seek data so that we can better advocate for the film festival field and the people who run film festivals. And so having your support and being able to use this as a way to go to our community and say, it's really important that we have this information so we can help create national benchmarks and have a better understanding of what the film festival field looks like. So this is a good driver for that.
And I just want to just respond in one way to your audience question. I think as we talk today, I'm going to be talking about the audience in at-home viewing, in theaters, in unconventional spaces a little bit. We don't have a lot of that data yet. But I also recognize that there is a sort of economic overlay in terms of what the audience can bring in terms of revenue in my presentation and in some of the work that I'm doing. I just wanted to say at the outset, this is not because the importance of the work that you all do or we all do in the field is measured by capital, but it's because the gaps that exist in sustainability and also the opportunity for impact is increased when we reach audiences of all kinds in all places. So I just wanted to put that context.
I want to know, how did you all approach taking on this massive research endeavor? What were some of the first steps you took, and how has that journey been for you all?
Well, I'll start, and then when I started the fellowship at the Shorenstein Center, I didn't intend to do outside, commission research, which is what we've done here. I started out just by interviewing and talking to a lot of people in the field. I probably did about 200 interviews in the fall, and read a lot and thought a lot about various areas. But one thing that kept coming back was with entrepreneurial efforts, with nascent policy efforts, with understanding the business sustainability, there were very few people who had any information about the audience. And it felt like perhaps something that we could contribute at the Shorenstein Center, and through my work, would be to try to commission a very broad look at the potential and the current audience for independent, in my case it's scripted and documentary. We'll focus on documentary today. So we worked with a ton of partners and vendors I'll tell you about in a moment when we go through, but that's how it came about.
And for us, I am very interested by data, but I am not a researcher by nature. And so the Art House Convergence, which is an organization of art house theaters and sort of community-based, mission-driven theaters, they are also participating in this data set. And so Alicia Kozma there kind of took the charge. She's at IU Cinema and has a very keen researcher's mind, and laid out these questions really brilliantly that asked really specifically around ticket sales and different things like that. And so I worked from that template to draft what would be appropriate for film festivals.
So I want to remind you all that during this presentation, please take notes. You're going to be seeing a lot of data. Please take notes on your questions. We'll open it up later for Q&A. And with that, I want to hand it over to what you all came here for, the data, the information. So I'm going to hand it over to Keri and Barbara to walk us through their deck, and then we'll come back up here to continue the conversation.
Thank you. Is it up? Oh, great. Great. Just let me get settled here. Can you hear me okay on this mic? Excellent, excellent. So I'm going to start off, but Barbara and I are going to do this together, right, Barbara? Good. Wherever works for you. So as I said, I'm going to share some data from the Shorenstein Center project. I want to recognize the folks at the Shorenstein Center. Sarah Archambault, I know, is here, and just thank you so much for the program, for the compatriots in your fellows program, all the people there. So my hope is that this research is going to add value to the efforts that so many of you in the field are working on to sustain and enliven and build a vital future for the independent documentary field. I also want to say we are still gathering data. You're catching us at a moment where information is just coming in, like giant spreadsheets that we haven't yet analyzed from some of our partners. So what you're seeing today will be a snapshot of the work. I hope to be able to publish something in June. So that's where we are in the process. So just wanted to point out for anybody, I'm not going to spend time on this, but for those of you who are curious about what my research covers overall, I'd be really happy to talk to anybody here about policy and regulation, which is something that I think is one of the most important issues we should be all talking about. Film economics, working on another look at the gap between cost to make things and the revenue that they're bringing in, with the generous help of Susan Margolin over there. Thank you. And then I'm doing the audience study that I'll tell you about, and then the landscape mapping, which is, I'll just pause on landscape mapping for a minute. So, as I said, I interviewed a lot of people, and in all my conversations, I heard about a lot of entrepreneurial ideas bubbling up, a lot of unconventional sort of bypassing gatekeeper ideas. But what was consistent was this lack of data about the audience. I will say that these conclusions and questions that I was drawing, another thing that I'm happy to talk about later, but I'm not going to stop on now. So, lack of data about the audience. With the support of Chris and Randy Gebhardt at the Random Good Foundation, thank you to them for funding this research. We began this study in February. It's an exploratory data analysis, so it's about broad trends in viewership, and what we hope is that this is going to inspire further research, catalyze conversation and questions, and additional data gathering is necessary, and it's going to point that out. So I will just dive in. What's our goal? Our goal is to learn the total addressable market, and that is who they are demographically, where they are, and why, if we can, why they're watching. That will be a bit harder. We're collaborating with a bunch of folks, including Film Festival Alliance and Art House Convergence, but also some commercial vendors and partners and collaborators that you'll see up there. And shout out to the research assistants too. Our definition of independent film is basically a film that's made and controlled creatively and financially by the makers. It doesn't necessarily matter if it ends up on a commercial platform, it's how it's made that drove our definition. And once we had that, we created a data set. It's really hard to go say out in the field, you know, who's watching independent documentary without sort of examples of what that means. And so we decided to work from a data set, created 330 titles from 2017 to 2022. Really happy to talk about how we chose those titles, what those titles represent, but in the interest of time and getting to the conversation, I'm gonna move forward. So before we get into the sort of details of the data set that we studied, I just wanted to give you a snapshot of the general theatrical market. One thing important to note here, the blue line represents attendance, and the red line represents box office. So what you'll see is attendance has dropped off by quite a bit and has not returned from the pandemic. We're missing about 25 to 30% of the audience in theaters around the country. And it's masked often because people have raised ticket prices. So it looks like the revenue is there, but that's the masking. And then next, I think it's interesting to look at the stream of studio titles that are released. That's the line along the bottom. And that's dropped pretty considerably from early in the last decade, but look what happens to independent titles. This includes the documentaries. What a vast number was happening before the pandemic, and then the drop off and very little recovery in theaters. So it's something, you know, we could all be talking about as we look at these trends. So now on to our data set. This is theatrical information first, and I'll do at-home viewing in a minute. But if you look at sorry, I'm just going to my side. So 60% of the docs in our data set in this period, 60% had limited or no theatrical release. So most of the docs are not in the theaters, but this is how many received it, and you can look at the scripted numbers as well. And you know, when you look at what the performance was amongst the titles that were released, once again, you can see our, you know, attendance figures are down pretty severely here. If you look at 2022 compared to 2017, we're talking about a 50% decline in the documentary viewership, which is more than I told you about as that average and more than the scripted. The median theatrical audience for a documentary in the theaters in 2022 was 5,000 people nationwide, which isn't too great. You know, it's interesting. We also will slice this data looking at demographic information, and my research assistant just shot me a note that I wanted to include. Out of the 12 documentaries that made over $1 million in the theaters over this whole period, only 2 of them were directed by people of color. So something else to think about, where's the money going, that we'll hopefully be looking at. The median number of screens is 24 for docs. The average is 39, so you can see some of those big ones really skew that. The time in theaters for documentaries, averaging about 3 weeks. Obviously, that includes the award campaigns. And here's where I want to stop and just say there is so much activity in cinemas that are outside of what's being tracked by these conventional box office companies. So to Assad's point earlier, you're talking about community centers, libraries, museums, other places that are not always tracked here. And I want to recognize the incredible activity that's going on, and we want to try to capture the audiences in those spaces, but it's difficult because they're mostly case studies of what's been done. No, there's not a lot of counts, but just putting that in the room. Now I'm going to turn, you want to come do this bit? Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
I think, Keri, you make a great point for why we should be tracking butts and seats and not box office dollars, because then we could track the library screenings and the impact screenings and be able to show actually how dynamic our field is and how much people want to come out. So again, thanks to Alicia Kozma and the entire Art House Convergence team for putting together their survey. I'm just going to go over a few initial insights and then the film festival insights as well. So what this shows here is a 25% drop in attendance, which is consistent with the national cinema averages put out by NATO, the National Association of Theater Owners, which tracks primarily commercial and multiplex theaters. They estimate around 3 million annual attendees across the sort of Art House Convergence network. And then that translates into, once you incorporate social media followers and email subscribers, about 5 million core fans nationwide. So that's a really robust sector. Yes, it is not what Marvel is, but that's not the game that we're in. And so I think it's important to think about that there are more people in America that follow these theaters, are getting their emails, are getting advertised to than are actually showing up. So that's really positive for us, and that gives us an opportunity to engage those folks. Art House Convergence did not have the level of demographic data that they were hoping for, and so that's something that the two organizations are working jointly on to help our field better understand what types of metrics to track, how to track them, and also to seek funding to assist in that, because it can be quite an onerous process. For Film Festival Alliance, our box office drop is a little bit higher. And so you'll see that there is about a 40% drop in box office sales, as well as in attendance. And so this, again, is taking our 2019 numbers and comparing them to our 2023 numbers. Some positives is that in our data, there were 5 new festivals that had opened since 2019. So while attendance is lower, there are still new festivals growing. And I'll also note that about 80% of our respondents to the survey had budgets under $500,000. So we're also really talking about a lot of regional festivals who are finding that their audiences are recovering more slowly. I will say that the news out of 2024 is looking bright. Already I've had a number of our festivals reach out and say they've had overcapacity, sold out screenings, much higher box office and attendance. So I'm hoping that when we return to this next year, we'll see a big spike. In terms of social media and email subscribers, our core fan base is about 7 million. So it is substantially more than who is actually showing up. So that also just says a little bit about the vibrancy of film festivals and kind of particularly, I think, you get a lot more filmmakers that are engaged and, again, something to think about as we're marketing our films and thinking about where we can reach audiences. There's a dynamism to film festivals that is very evident. The next slide is some demographic information that we have, but it is at most, the biggest response rate was 66%. And again, we had 57, we had about a quarter of our festivals responding. So this data is important to share, but it is by no means like this is what it is. And what this actually says is we need to do a lot more work collecting this information. Also, the ways that this information was collected was a variety of, surveying, kind of standing in line and like asking people to fill out forms as they go in. And I would imagine a decent amount of eyeballing, right? Which we know is not a great way to gather demographic data. So again, this is why both FFA and Art House are working to establish a common set of metrics and approaches and methodology for surveying so that we can more accurately capture what we're up to. I think for me, as someone who has a hearing loss, I'm always very excited about the disabled question and about disability. And I found it very interesting that of the people who responded, the average was 5%, but that then 5 festivals reported 20 or more % of their festival identifying as disabled, which we know to be more accurate since 1 in 4 Americans do have a disability. So again, I think this data, it is interesting mostly in the sense that it gives us a little bit of a baseline, and more interesting in that it lets us know how little information we know about who is actually coming to watch our films.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to try to move through this next section because I want to get to the conversation. We're going to talk about the at-home market. So, and just like with theatrical, just doing a little level setting on the general market. You can see here how many years of content was streamed last year. You can also see the breakdown between streaming, broadcast, cable, and a bucket of other things that is put out by Nielsen, and the top channels. What you probably know intuitively is streaming is growing quickly on this pie chart, and overtaking broadcast and cable. And I think if you look at the PBS audience studies, kind of projections of where their audience is going to be, the yellow line, is well, sorry, I should look at this. The linear PBS is the pink line in the middle, and linear plus streaming is the top line. They're not adding enough streaming viewers to catch up with the decline in broadcast. This is a real problem we all need to be thinking about in policy, I think, and investment. So with at-home viewing, I'm talking about our data set again, and one of the vendors that we worked with is a company called Parrot Analytics. What they do, we're also working with Nielsen. I'll talk about that in a minute. What Parrot helps us do is understand demand for different titles. And when they talk about demand, it's because, number one, it's really hard to get actual streaming data from any of the big streamers outside of the most popular, top 20% of titles. So that's one reason that they need other metrics to go chase. Demand is calculated by Parrot by tracking social media mentions, IMDb searches, Google searches, even piracy. They have a whole bunch of data points that they pull together. And what's helpful is a lot of them are tied to demographics, and they correlate to ratings pretty well. All the major streamers use them. So that is what Parrot does. I want you to just note the demand. In the center is good demand, and that is between 2 times the average demand up to 8 times. Note that bracket. If you're any less than that, it's hard to aggregate enough audience. If you're more than that, you're one of those top 20 titles. So this good area is where titles that can find their audience live. And now we'll look at our titles in our data set. The red line is the documentaries. So, this is the recovery. You can see pre-pandemic, some spikes in at-home viewing. The years are along the bottom there. But as the pandemic hit, it didn't go way, way up, which I would have thought it would, actually. It's sort of flatlining. Scripted has come back. Documentary is flatlining. And it's flatlining around 1.5% demand. Average from all these titles that we're looking at. Scripted is up at 4.5 for independent scripted. So that's a challenge. And why is that? I think we have to look into more. I have some thoughts about it. Maybe you do too. But on the bright side, I wanted to look at the demand for ITBS and POV. So POV at the top, 2.2 average demand. That is in that good range. It's at the low end of that range, but it's there. And for independent lens, 4.2. That's a really good space in that range. And so I think this is a bright spot and something to really lean into. There's a lot more about how long, duration, all sorts of stuff in that data that we could pull out. But the other thing is that we know, I talked to ITBS, and the independent lens ratings for this season, this last season, the full season, was 20.9 people across broadcast and streaming. That's a really big number, watching independent lens, and I think that this demand correlates to that number. It'll help us down the road. This is a quick look at demographics from Parrot. There's not that much that's coming yet, but this is documentaries are skewing towards females and Gen X on our data set. Quickly, the other at-home viewing we're looking at, Nielsen is doing ratings for every one of these 330 titles across all platforms, from broadcast to cable to streaming. So we're going to have all of those ratings, and they'll all be sorted by demographics, by household income, by other factors. We'll be able to really look at some patterns there, but we just got that data set this week, and it's a lot. YouTube, I want to pause on YouTube. We're looking at YouTube because it's bigger than Netflix now. It's where a lot of people are watching. It's free and open to everybody. It is really hard to get attention on that platform. But the case study, let's say, of Frontline, they have 2.7 million followers on YouTube. They're regularly getting 300 to 400,000 viewers on YouTube for Frontline. And they're doing that in a very strategic way that hopefully we'll share some case studies on. Last thing that we're looking at are the niche streaming platforms. This would be everything from Criterion Collection to Documentary Plus to Water Bear, and many, many more. The challenge in that area is there's no data on most of those platforms about their subscriber or viewership numbers, and that what we have been able to get, most of them are very, very small. We're dividing the audience in a lot of different places, so that's something that we'll all want to think about and talk about. We did a national audience survey with 10,000 people in 50 states. And I love these results. This just came in this week too. So of the people that identify, it's adult Americans, of the people who identify as regular movie watchers, 45% of those, 32 million people, identify as documentary fans. Now, this isn't based on our data set, so that could be a music celebrity doc, a true crime doc, but it's still a fan base that's out there that's self-identifying. I thought that was pretty encouraging. We also did a study with the Kennedy School. They were running a study in the field of 28,000 people. We put a few documentary questions in. Similar results. We have a really high number of people saying that they've seen a documentary in the past 3 months. You have 2 to 5 documentaries, 61% of the respondents. Where are they watching them? Streaming platform. Second place, PBS, 20%. So I thought that was interesting. And we'll be looking at fan bases, as I mentioned, impact educational, non-theatrical distribution, and also audiences in related, and business models in related places like Bookshop or The Atlantic or some Substacks. So I'll leave it there. These are the signals. I think we should look at this as a time of opportunity where we can democratize how we get to audiences, where we can engage them in our work, and where we can grow the community around independent media as an alternative to what is being fed us by these dominant platforms that really is corporate entertainment seeking to retain our eyeballs, take our data, and we want to put something. We want to make space for putting alternatives in the world. So that's the goal here. Thank you.
Please join us back up here. Thank you so much. So one of the things I'm thinking about that I did not see in the data, and I want to know if it's coming, is in impact work and just event production. We're thinking about audience care quite a bit and thinking about the psychological and emotional state that the film is going to put the audience in. Are there any data points that speak to kind of those audience needs, like are audiences looking to be numbed by film, escape, scared, experienced joy. Can you talk about that?
Yes, so the Art House Convergence is doing a national audience survey right now, and I'm not sure if this particular iteration has these questions in it, but the previous iterations that they had done through 2020 had a number of questions where people would sort of is sentiment-based analysis. How does going to the movie theater make you feel? How do these films make you feel? And a lot of it was, I feel like a stronger connection to my community. This film changed my life. You know, there's a lot of really strong analysis around the impact of film on people's lives.
We have some questions that aren't probably as deep as that, just given the breadth of what we're doing, but we did add, why do you watch documentaries? And we had a menu of a few choices on both of our surveys for that.
Yeah, I think that data would be very helpful because, it's hard to find those particulars. But I would like to open it up to audience questions because I do not want to run out of time before we do that. So at this point, we have some runners and mics floating, right? So let's open it up for questions. Do we have a question? Yes. Right here, front row. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Tabitha Jackson, and this work is so fascinating. My brain is quite slow before coffee, so I want you to help me, both of you, with the meaning of this, and you've alluded to certain points going along, but what was the most striking thing that you want to convey from what you're both discovering?
I mean, for me, what I'm hoping to convey is the scale of the community that is interested in this work, because we have been, as a field, we've been painted with the brush of the big global streamers saying, this work doesn't bring enough value, it doesn't bring enough market, it doesn't bring enough eyeballs, we're not even gonna play it anymore. And I think while we may not be big enough to matter to some of those big streamers in their business model, and that's their business model, I think we are big enough to engage an audience both at home and in theaters, and we all love theaters, but I feel like we also have to listen to the audience where they want to watch, so finding where they're watching will help us engage them, and that in turn will help the field be more impactful and more sustainable economically. So that's the goal, and sharing that information so other people can study it and think about it.
I echo that. I love how this demonstrates that, in fact, there is a very large audience that we can all tap into. I think on the film festival side and on the art house side, what it demonstrates is that we are still in recovery, and we are predominantly nonprofit. Our revenue sources are somewhat reliant on donations and support from the community, but we do also rely on ticket sales and things, and so we are still struggling. And if you find it of value to join in community, to be in events, film festival spaces, to be able to go to your local theater, it's really important that we come together. So I think there's a demonstrated audience, so there's not a lack of revenue. It's just about funneling that money to these spaces so that we can all continue to enjoy it together.
Can I just say one more thing on that briefly? One of the big findings we have, and Barbara talked about this earlier, is a lot of these independent spaces, whether it's an individual film team releasing their film on their own, a community release, or the art house theaters and the festivals, they don't actually have sophisticated marketing that actually enables them using data to know their audience and then reach their audience. Now, we wouldn't want to do extractive marketing. We wouldn't want to do marketing that is ambiguous in its ethics, but I think there are incredible tools with a little bit of investment that could be shared across those spaces and allow individual films and festivals and art house theaters to actually reach their promise of being in touch with more people. So for any funders in the room, I think investing in data and marketing for these spaces is really important.
And I also think it's important to think about coming together as a liberatory practice, and for us to look at it as a way of resistance to isolation. And if we can build worlds together and community together in person, that's a beautiful thing. I want to go here. It's you in the vest. And then we're going to go one more, just one more. We only have time for one more, y'all.
We got a little late start. I'm sorry.
That's
It went
okay.
too long.
There was a
We'll
lot of
stand
data.
in the plaza.
Yes.
And
Yeah, I'd
answer
love to talk to
questions.
anybody who has a question. I'd love to hear your thoughts too.
All right, let's take this question.
Hi, Christine Delp. Thank you so much for this report. This is really exciting. 2 questions. First, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how you selected the titles in the study. And then also, you mentioned that you were in the middle of data collection, so I'd love to hear more about next steps, what we can look forward to.
Yes, the selection of titles in this study was a challenge because we didn't have a budget to study too many more than the 330 we did. We looked for 50 a year. It's 175 docs out of the 330 titles, so majority docs. And what we did is we picked titles that we studied the background of the titles, so we picked titles that fit that criteria that I talked about of what's independent in terms of how they were made to the best of our ability. And we focused on, because we're doing an audience study, we focused on titles that played at festivals that tend to have acquisitions where films are able to reach an audience. And so that is a skew in this data. We recognize a ton of great films are playing regional festivals or taking other approaches. But we used Sundance, South by, Tribeca, and Doc NYC for our selection. We vetted it with a bunch of advisors across the field and locked that in. It's imperfect, but it's a start.
So
I was going to add that for Film Festival Alliance, so we have this, which we're going to continue to analyze the data and pull out what we can about trends overall. Our House Convergence has done something similar, and that will be attached to the Shorenstein report. And then for FFA more broadly, we are next doing a redux of a wage and compensation survey so we can analyze the wages of current festival workers. And then followed by that, we're going to be looking at marketing, followed by that doing a deep dive into audience ourselves so that at the end of the year, hopefully we can generate a very dynamic economic impact report that shows that film festivals can change the world.
And also we'll be putting, we want to build a website where all the reports that we've commissioned will live so that you're not relying on our analysis, but also we'll include our analysis there too. So that's our goal. Hopefully this summer, we'll see.
thank you. So we have to wrap now, but they will be available. Keri and Barbara will stick around after so you can find them. Hopefully this work will continue to help us grow new audiences and get more support for filmmakers in creating new works. So I would like to thank you. Can we please give it up for Barbara and Keri? Thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to Lisa.
Yes, thank you again, Barbara, Keri, and Assad. It's me with my boring housekeeping notes for just a moment before you go. First of all, yes, please continue to ask them questions after the panel is officially over. As you may recall, today the conference is once again in person all day here in the 2 Janum rooms. We've got our lunch once again in the other building, just as we did yesterday. We also have several wonderful sessions on Zoom today. Please check the online schedule. There's also a couple of filmmaker meetups. Apologies if I'm talking too quickly. At the IDA office. Tomorrow, the entire conference will move in person to the Japanese American Cultural and Community Center. We have 3 films streaming on the online platform that have been made available by 3 of our speakers for all the conference registrants to watch, so please take a look for those. Pardon? The Mother of All Lies by Asma El Mudir, and Angel 69 by Teo Montoya, and Unseen by Seth Hernandez. Finally, do think about what you might like to bring to the Build Your Own breakout sessions on Thursday afternoon. We're inviting everyone to come and bring the idea they want to talk about more. It could very well be this. You don't have to know about the topic, you just have to be willing to help raise it and be with a bunch of people talking about it all more. So this might be an excellent, excellent topic to dive into more. Thank you so very much. See you at the next sessions.